Happy Friday, and welcome to another episode of BrainScratch. I'm John Lorden, and we have a very special episode for you today. Not one, not two, but three guests will be helping us learn about today's case. Dennis Wustenhoff served his country in Vietnam, earning a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. Then came home and served his community as a police officer in Suffolk County, New York, and then as an undercover narcotics detective. He received over 20 commendations in the 2 decades on the job. Working in the narcotics division, Dennis was called by his commanding officer the soul of the narcotics squad. He usually dressed up as Santa for the department's Christmas party and helped organize the St. Patrick's Day party and detective picnics. At home, he was a caring father and husband. To this day, his kids talk about their happy memories with their father, memories from over 30 years ago. Dennis Wustenhoff was senselessly killed by a car bomb placed in his undercover vehicle right in front of his home. Some articles mention he's a man that was living 2 lives professionally. Narcotics is undercover work, part detective, part actor, but it seems he might have been doing that in his personal life as well. Regardless of the nationwide coverage that turned his story from fallen hero to cheating husband in literally a matter of hours, his children and his wife are still looking for justice more than 30 years later, and they might be closer than ever to it right now. I was introduced to this case by my new friend Mike King over at the Profiling Evil YouTube channel, and today I need his help and his experience to dive into this story. We're going to go through the case details together, and then later in this episode, I'll be joined by Dennis Wustenhoff's 2 daughters, Jen and Melissa. Let's get started. And joining me now is Mike King from the Profiling Evil. I don't want to say it's just a channel. It's you've got all kinds of different projects that are going on with Profiling Evil. But how you doing today, Mike?
Doing really well, John. I'm so grateful for the chance to come on with you. I've enjoyed working with you.
Well, I'm really happy to have you here. You know, the YouTube true crime thing has literally been exploding over the past few years. And you're one of the creators. When I bumped into your content, I was like, I got to work with this guy. We've got to work this out. And you were actually the one to reach out first. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, done. Let's start working.
Well, that was a blessing for me. Quick speed date, and now we're together.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of why I was so interested is because I want to see more of this where we have people with law enforcement experience talking about these issues, trying to help us understand this type of coverage more. Can you share with our audience what your background and experience is?
Yeah, I was really lucky. For the last 40 years, I've been involved in law enforcement. I worked my way through the ranks I started out as a street cop in a city in an area of about 280,000 people. I had the opportunity to work patrol. I was really lucky during the years when Chips was famous on television. I was riding motors for the police department, so I had the mirrored sunglasses and the shiny knee-high boots. Then from there, I was really privileged, I believe, to be selected to be on the department's SWAT team, the tactical team, and worked SWAT operations for a number of years, which gave me a little more rounding, a little more understanding of some things. Then I moved into investigations. And from there, my career just kind of exploded, John. I was hired by the district attorney in the area to come in and work undercover sting operations. And we had a team. We were buying stolen vehicles and selling cars out of the back of chop shops and trying to work our way up the chain. And one day I ended up walking through the county attorney's office, and a young woman asked if she could talk to me for a moment. I paused. She said, "I've been involved in a cult that's sexually abusing children. Can you give me a minute?" And that just took my career in an absolute direction I never planned on going. I looked into that investigation, which ultimately put 12 people in prison. It resulted in more than 4,000 counts of rape and sexual assault of children. It was the largest case ever in our state, and probably the United States, because it was so successfully prosecuted. That got the attention of the legislature, who hired me to go to the state and run a ritual crime task force. And I worked doing polygamy, and back in, if you remember the early 90s, it was kind of the satanic panic era.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was investigating cults for a number of years. At that time, I was introduced to FBI profilers and learned this art and science of profiling, and have spent my entire career looking at cold cases, missing persons, and trying to help in some way. And we launched this YouTube channel thinking it would just be a way to maybe help share some of these investigative processes so the public understands things.
Well, we're really thankful that you're doing that, and I'm really thankful to have you here to talk about this case. Before we do jump into it, I know that we've got a lot of people out there very interested in cults. Mike has actually put a book together called Deceived about the Zion Society cult. So, yeah, and let's go ahead and start talking about this. So, do cop homicides generally get solved, Mike? I know I saw a stat a couple years ago, and we know that the national average of homicides is going down in terms of solve rate. It's somewhere floating around 60, sometimes dips under that depending on what state you're looking at. But if I recall correctly, I saw some stats that that cop homicides in particular have a much higher solve rate. But I went looking for those stats, and now when you look up cop homicides, like the Google search is completely different. It's all very focused on other types of homicides.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. And if I could pair it into two little buckets, I'd like to do that for just a moment. And that is first to look at homicide in general in the United States, because you're right. Back in the 1960s, we were solving 90% of all murder cases. Today, according to USA Today and other publications, those numbers are down to like 62%. And people are like pulling their hair out thinking, have cops gotten that bad at what they do? And it's absolutely not the case. If you think back to my childhood in particular, I often think about when our family decided the one time we were going to go to Disneyland. We lived in Salt Lake City, and it's 1,100 miles-ish to Los Angeles and Disneyland. That was a 3-day drive. And back then, I mean, we had cars that you rolled the window down. You didn't push a button. And if you were really in a fancy car, you had a bucket that you put ice in that hung on the outside of the window, and that was your air conditioning for the car. But every town you went through, everybody knew each other. They sat out on their porches at night. They yelled at their neighbors and said hello. And now fast forward to today, I can have my family in Disneyland in 60 minutes.
Yeah.
I can commit a crime in downtown Los Angeles, be on the 4:00 plane to Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. And when an event happens, the mindset of law enforcement is, I'm going to look for this homicide suspect in my city. And frankly, we just have become so mobile that we are no longer effective if we think that way. So that's kind of the first thing. Now, when we talk about law enforcement, it's a different dynamic, because usually law enforcement officers are murdered in the course of their line of duty. It's an event where they're approaching a suspect on a warrant and there's a gun battle or something like that. So we usually know who we're after. We know the circumstances. The scene is so much tighter. And so then the evidence becomes easier to gather and place together.
That's a really, really good point. And even to the considerations of this case in particular, of Dennis's case, initially the investigation very much focused on his work. He's working undercover narcotics, and even that is probably a big list in terms of people he's interacted with, people he's jailed, people that he's just been working with or tailing. But you have a list at that point. You at least have, okay, we're going to start processing this list and figuring out who did this. Of course, we get to other considerations with this case. Just to paint the picture for us a little bit, take us back to the late 1980s. What's going on with narcotics and law enforcement at that time?
Oh, this was a crazy time. Most officers working at that time were either just at the tail end of Vietnam or coming home from Vietnam. So the officers that were working narcotics came from, for the most part, a military, paramilitary background. Law enforcement's paramilitary. Narcotics were starting to explode. We were starting to see really big deals with the continuation of heroin and all kinds of illicit drugs. Law enforcement in those days determined, and frankly today still to some degree, that in order to be successful and get deep enough into the criminal organization, you have to have officers working undercover. And cops loved that because police work back in those days, I mean, you had to have a tight haircut, your boots were shined, and all of a sudden you give these cops the chance to go start growing beards and wearing shabby clothes and driving unmarked cars. But these narcotics cops were great. Think about this. Today, if a police officer goes on a call, let's say an armed call where there's a possibility of a gun or something, they may have a dozen officers backing them up by the time the call's over. A narcotic officer that's trying to build a case is buying dope and seeing guns and stolen things. And oftentimes they're alone with nothing but a wire and really bad transmitters back in those days with their backup a block away listening on a really scratchy radio. It was serious business then. It is today. Today it's amplified because now we have so many more dangers of automatic weapons and other kinds of things. But this was no place for sissies back in those days.
Yeah, definitely. So Mike is going to join me as we do our usual pass on the research. Let's go ahead and start doing that here together. Starting at Wikipedia, just to learn about where this is taking place. North Patchogue. I've been practicing how to say it, and then when we get here, I actually blow it. North Patchogue is a hamlet and census-designated place in Suffolk County, New York, United States. It's located on Long Island. Pretty small area, just a total area of 2 square miles. And this is where Dennis and his family lived. This is where the car was, and unfortunately, this is the scene that it would turn into on February 15th, 1990. So for researching a case of this age, obviously the internet sources, not so easy to come by, but thanks to newspapers.com, we're able to pull some old articles from back then. And this was a national news story as soon as this thing hit. I'm finding references to this. I mean, it hit the Associated Press and went right across the wire. Everybody in the country is essentially reporting on this as soon as it happens. Narcotics detective dies in car bombing. Police investigators sifted through the debris of a car bomb explosion today, searching for clues to the apparent assassination of an undercover narcotics detective. Dennis Wustenhoff, 41, died from injuries suffered in a blast that was caused by an explosive device planted beneath the front seat of his unmarked car, said a Suffolk County police spokesman. Now, that information seems to change a little bit as we go through the sources, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to come to a clear conclusion or not on that, but we'll let you know about all the different considerations. So this is the first one. They think the bomb was actually planted under the seat. Police were trying to determine whether the explosive device was set to go off when the car's engine was turned on, when Wustenhoff sat on the front seat, or when the car door was opened. So obviously they're looking for triggering methods there, and these are kind of the most common ones. In the recent retellings I've been seeing, there's been some articles that have been kicking up on this case again lately. There seems to be this kind of simple assumption that, he went to start the car and it blew up. I think we're all remembering a scene from, I don't know, The Untouchables or something that we saw where that happened. But there's a big question in terms of what the triggering mechanism is. And you don't have any better insight on that, right?
No, other than the fact that it really becomes a question about would the killer have taken the time to wire to something in the vehicle? Now, from that location under the seat, or if it was under the vehicle, potentially they could have got to wiring that might have been to a brake light or something like that, which our natural tendency is to step on the brake as we start a motor up. But again, was the triggering device electronic because of that, or was it pressure sensitive, him sitting on the seat? And because there was so much damage, the vehicle wasn't running. And, back in those days, I hope it's documented somewhere, but we don't know whether that key was turned or not, because that could be really significant as we think about the personality of the killer, tells us a lot in simple things like that. So it's really cool that you would even spend time focusing on that, John, because it is more significant than most people would think.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we do have some understanding just from popular culture of bombs can sometimes tell the investigators personality traits of the person that designed them, or sometimes there's very specific things about the make and manufacturer that are elements they can trace. Like if there's a specific thing that's used in it, that they can then try to find someone that purchased that, or trace them down that way. So,
Oh, you are absolutely right. I mean, I think of Ted Kaczynski, and I've studied him a lot. I've worked with the psychiatrists and psychologists that dealt with him. That very much was a personality-driven series of murders, and you do see as you put all of these pieces together, you see this personality start to rise to the surface.
yeah. So here we also get a statement from Police Commissioner Daniel Guido saying that Wustenhoff was probably assassinated and it was job connected. Obviously, we know his line of work is already dangerous in terms of its nature, and I think that's probably a good first step for the investigation, thinking that that's what happened there. Quote, "We don't know whether it was for revenge or was connected to a current case." So that's another important consideration. Is this someone that he had locked up previously that got out, or got word out to someone to exact revenge? Or did someone just notice, hey, there's this guy that's, coming into our circle of friends here and we don't know who he is, but he seems like a cop, and they follow him home one day and find where his car is, or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's a really dangerous thing today for narcotics officers. They have to be so careful, especially with social media and other things, because they could get burned really quickly in these kinds of things. And back then, someone could have easily followed him to the police station or something else if they would have just tagged him. So that became a really significant piece of the puzzle that needed to be vetted out.
Oh yeah, with the technology that's available now, I mean, a little magnetic box under, tossed under the car, and all of a sudden they're able to tell exactly where you are. Yeah. They're noting he was off duty at the time. The highly decorated Wustenhoff was off duty when the car exploded outside his home at about noon on Thursday. He was airlifted to State University Hospital in Stony Brook in critical condition with severe abdominal injuries. He would hang on for a bit, but unfortunately about 3 hours later, he would pass away while undergoing surgery, this also notes. They talk about his past a little bit here. He had moved up from street-level drug arrests to investigations of high-level drug trafficking on Long Island. They also note that the bomb was a high-order explosive, and debris from the police-issued white Cadillac was found 200 feet away. That is a crazy blast radius, and just thankfully his family wasn't home at the time. I just think of, one of his daughters or his son heading out to say goodbye to him as he's leaving to work for the day, just being that close. I mean, 200 feet. I mean, that's certainly to the front of the home.
Could have been another casualty.
Yeah.
It was a terrible thing.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting too when you think about this. I mean, Long Island is just a short drive from Manhattan. I mean, this is while it's a smaller community in population, the daily travel through population is huge in that county, and their policing challenges are huge. This is a big police department. This isn't, a small agency. This is a big agency. And so now all of a sudden you got all these detectives that have to also start looking over their shoulders, wondering, well, is this a series?
Right. And it does also note here that a neighbor came out to help Dennis, and Dennis was able to speak to the neighbor. This neighbor was a firefighter. We know this from other conversations we've had with the family. And I'm curious, I'm going to ask his daughters a little bit later if they heard any of what was actually told to the firefighter. But let's go ahead and continue. Just a little clip that I pulled in here. The car belonged to the police and was being used in undercover work, said County District Attorney James Catterson. Guido said that the slaying in this suburb on Long Island's South Shore, more than 70 miles east of New York City, was not a street-level operation. It was much higher than that. So he's already starting to look at this and realizing, I'm not sure that this is one of the guys that This isn't some kid on the corner that Dennis busted a couple years ago. This is something different in terms of its nature. The car had been parked in front of Wustenhoff's home since 1 a.m. on Tuesday. The detective had used the car between 5 p.m. and 1 a.m. while working that day. So that's the 13th of February, that Tuesday. That's his last work day that he's actually on shift. The 14th, he's supposed to go in, but decides he's not going to go in. Winds up taking one of his daughters to a father-daughter dance. And then it looks like he's resuming work on Thursday, the 15th, and about 11:55 a.m. he goes out to the car, and that's when it happens. Other considerations about it here. Wustenhoff's wife, Fran, and his 3 children went into hiding after he was killed. Cops said the bomb was placed in the undercarriage of the car. So here we get a different version of it, and designed to explode upward. Cops do not know if it was detonated by remote control or triggered by the ignition switch. And to your point, there's other triggering methods that could happen around that. Guido said all evidence indicates Wustenhoff was the target of the bomb and that it was not aimed at a random police target to send a message to cops. And they keep pointing in these articles to the fact that it's under his seat. It's under the driver's seat specifically for a car that he would use. And a car that's it's not his family car. This is essentially his work car. So I think that's a good point about it in terms of the target.
John, as you think about the level of risk that the killer would have had to have taken in order to do that, that's a pretty low to the ground vehicle. So most likely he had to be in the street laying next to the vehicle to reach up under and secure that device. It gave him some concealment because the vehicle would block any view from the house if someone heard a noise. But again, this kind of speaks to what a quiet neighborhood that was, and that in the wee hours of the morning, someone could sneak in and undetected be seen there. That's again kind of a interesting characteristic of this case.
Yeah, definitely. And around that time, we are starting to have neighborhood watches pop up. And, from what I hear about Dennis, I'm pretty sure this is a guy that was keeping an eye out for his neighbors. I'm pretty sure he had some neighbors. I mean, one of them's a firefighter that runs out when this actually goes off. So it does seem to me that this might have been something that was planted in the middle of the night or something like that, especially knowing that his car is effectively there from 1 a.m., from his last workday all through the 14th. And then at some point on the 15th, it blows up. So that effectively gives you 2 nights where it could have been placed.
Yeah.
And they talk about a different case here. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this one, but I just wanted to cover it. They're kind of making the point that this wasn't to send a random message to cops. If you look at the Eddie Byrne case, in which a Queens drug gang carried out an order to randomly kill a local cop, anyone who was sitting in that police car that night would have been killed as a part of that message, Guido said. What we have here is focused on this individual. It was not just a pipe bomb that would have an explosive effect in all directions. This pipe bomb was framed in a way that it was clearly targeted at this individual.
Yeah, boy, what does that tell you about the bomb maker to be able to direct that, control that? Because most people that would create a pipe bomb, those are the guys that end up with their hands blown off because they're trying to figure it out in the basement. This is somebody that really understands how to project the impact of a blast.
Right. And then I'm sure these images grab at your heart, Mike. I know they grab at mine as well. Final tribute to slain detective, narc honored as hero, 5,000 cops at funeral. And from what I'm seeing, we're not just talking about local area cops. There's people coming in from different states. There's people coming in from different countries.
Yeah, that is one of the real cool things about law enforcement is they stand behind each other.
Yeah. Which makes the kind of turn in this case even a little trickier to understand. The Suffolk County Patrolmen's Benevolent Association is offering a $100,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of Wustenhoff's killer. So they offer a big reward very quickly. I'm not familiar with what a Benevolent Association is. Can you tell us about that, Mike?
So those are set up usually at the patrol officer or the non um, supervisory levels. They are groups that are used for bargaining power when there comes issues. But they're the kind of group also that's doing the shopping with cops at Christmas time and making sure what most police departments did, what we did. Every officer put a portion of their paycheck into the Benevolent Association so that you could help take care of another cop's family or make sure you pay for lawn care for a cop that's injured in the line of duty or shop with kids at Christmas and make sure they have a Christmas.
Wow. Wow. It's amazing to know that there's other organizations like that looking to support people.
Yeah, and they're paid so poorly in the first place.
Right, right. Suffolk Police Commissioner Daniel Guido said that among those attending the service were 3 police officers from Paris. Others came from departments in New York City, Long Island, Boston, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. It's amazing. Especially, have you spoken to officers from other countries before? It's so interesting to me that this type of work would unify and almost create that brotherhood, even though you're working in such different places, such different conditions.
Yeah, I actually have worked on cases all over the world. But in part of my day job, I work for a company. We have 140 offices around the world. And so I meet with law enforcement. I actually focus on law enforcement agencies in the 60 largest cities in the world.
Wow.
So yeah, you come to know the different law enforcement officers. And the cool thing is, with all of their national idiosyncrasies, they're all cops at heart, and they all have kind of the same mentality. And you look at a city like New York City, I mean, the CIA has operatives all over the world. The next largest organization with operatives working in other countries is the New York City Police Department. So what they've learned over the years, especially following 9/11, is that terrorism and intel needs to be picked up in many different areas. So
Wow.
a lot of people don't realize those kinds of things.
Yeah, I've never heard about that before. I didn't know that they would do that. It's weird because, the perception is that police departments are so jurisdictional that sometimes they won't even let cooperation happen between them. Like, hey, you're butting into our business over here.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, that is one of our Achilles heels.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially to your point about how criminals are more enabled now in terms of technology and travel and all that kind of stuff. Some of those jurisdictional issues can create, some challenges, I think, in these investigations. And we might even have a little bit of that going on in this case. Jumping over to the Daily News, an article from February 21st, 1990, sources said police began checking motives other than drug dealers' revenge because the undercover car was registered in a phony name and to a phony address, and it would have been difficult to track down Wustenhoff's address through the car's license. Additionally, the detective's home phone number and address were not listed in phone company records, which back then was the best way for you to pretty much stay anonymous, make sure that you weren't in the white pages. But that's something I'm very interested in. I know I kind of asked this when we talked about this case over on your channel, like what protections are in place for undercover workers, particularly if they're using a car for their undercover work. Would you want that car necessarily even parked in front of your home at some point? But here they had some protections. It's registered under a fake name to a fake address.
Yeah, and you can't have, especially a car used in dope cases, you can't have 2 or 3 detectives sharing the same car because all of a sudden that raises ire in that very narrow field that you're pursuing. So no, I mean, what you do is you try to cover, you give IDs. For many years, I had ID because I lived near an Air Force base and was doing a lot of work on the Air Force base. My name was Mike Brown for a lot of years. Mike Brown is now the chief of the Salt Lake City Police Department. And why that name was the one that I was given, I have no idea. I hope it never has caused Mike problems, but you end up with identification. You end up with tags that help you be successful in your assignment.
Right. So we're seeing a shift here in terms of the investigation. They're starting to look other places, and that's where we come to these 2 people, love triangle-eyed, in narc bomb slaying. We've got Robert Haran on the right and Nancy Haran, and this is where some of the information about personal things that are going on in the marriage, in Dennis's marriage, start coming out. And the date on this article is February 23rd. Literally, this information starts flowing out so quickly. There are actually some articles that are talking about the coverage of his funeral and fusing together this aspect, that there was a love triangle that was going on, which is kind of unfortunate. I almost wish they would, hey, do the article about the funeral, then do the article about the investigation. Some of them were just kind of combining everything. But you might be able to speak to this a little bit, Mike, with your experience in Undercover as well. What I'm understanding from looking into this case is undercover cops can't be known to the community at large. So they get kind of insular. They kind of socialize within their own groups of typically other cops. I mean, even your show, Choir Practice, is a little bit of that aspect. It's you guys spending time together because you understand what you're facing together. You're able to talk about that and kind of help process it at the end of the day. Stresses of the job are also another common factor in keeping that social group strong but small. What do you think about this aspect of it, Mike? Does that foster relationship issues? Are divorce rates significant for undercover officers?
I don't know about that. I know that there have been periods of time where I have heard studies that say law enforcement has a high turnover rate in marriages, that there is a lot of stress that comes with the job that they can't take home, or they unfortunately do take home. There's no question that when you do an undercover assignment, it's usually like a new officer that comes into a unit that gets assigned to an undercover role. Many times departments just resort to having confidential informants and then controlling them, and the detectives become handlers rather than buying the dope themselves, because their lifeline, their length of service in that particular calling is so limited because they can get burned so quickly. They eventually have to go to court. It eventually becomes known that they're out there. So you'll see like vice units putting new cops out looking and buying sex trade workers or something like that, because they haven't been seen. They're not familiar to the criminal element. But even in big cities, you cannot remain anonymous very long. And so that's why we also see a lot of officers that become handlers rather than investigators. Those were the early days of putting these things together, though.
Yeah. Let's start going through some of this here. The bomb slaying of an undercover narcotics detective may be the result of a love triangle, not a revenge bombing by drug dealers, as was first suspected, according to a police source. And it's interesting because there's a lot of police sources that start talking around this case that largely go unnamed, and then it seems like the departments start getting upset about all the leaks that are happening around this as well. A Nassau police spokesman has confirmed that Nassau County police officer Robert Haran is a suspect, although no arrest has been made in the slaying. A second source, also involved in the investigation and who also spoke on condition of anonymity, says that the victim, Suffolk County police officer Dennis Wustenhoff, 41, allegedly was involved with Haran's wife, Nancy, a Federal Drug Enforcement Administration employee. Which I didn't even come to know until I started looking into this case deeper. So effectively, he starts working a case where he's interacting with the DEA regularly sometime before this. And it seems like this is how they meet, and something strikes up between the two of them.
Yeah, that goes back to your earlier comments about, is it normal in these relationships or what's going on? This was not driven because he was undercover and couldn't go out, or didn't dare take his wife out to dinner, or only went to one bar, and that's where he met this person. He met him through working. She may have even been tied to some of the cases that he was working, because local law enforcement and federal law enforcement work together all the time on cases. So it makes really good sense.
Continuing over at Philadelphia Daily News, Haran's name was confirmed by Nassau Police spokesman William Bendel. Haran, a 20-year veteran, was assigned to Emergency Services Bureau for Nassau County, where officers receive bomb detonation and explosives training. Can you tell us what emergency services is, Mike? I'm not familiar with that.
Well, depending on the organization, it sounds like they have put under that bucket of emergency services things like the bomb techs, or maybe the tactical units, or other kinds of things. Emergency service in another area could just mean that we're going to handle disasters when they come up. So it really becomes definitional to the organization. And frankly, I'm not sure about this one.
Okay. And bomb detonation. So effectively, these are officers that would be trained if they were called out for, hey, a suspicious package has showed up somewhere and it's suspected to be an explosive device. They might go out and use a smaller explosive device to set it off, right?
Correct. Or go through the process of diffusing, or giving advice on how to clear the area until somebody from an EOD, an explosive ordnance team, could come in. But this guy, from what I've been able to study, had more knowledge than the normal guy. I mean, when I was on the SWAT team, we were trained in ordnance, because we lived next to an Air Force base that was filled with ordnance, and we had F-16s that were coming in, and they were worried that one day one would crash in the city with a bomb hanging off its wing, or something like that. So we got a certain amount of training, and I'll say, John, we actually had an F-16 go down, and I was the one called out, and I started laughing and said, "Get somebody else, because I have no idea how to advise on a F-16's missile." And of course, thankfully they pulled in some people from the Air Force to solve that. But this guy, it sounds like, was a lot more advanced than most explosive ordnance people that are trained to just understand, detect, keep blast standoff distances, and other kind of things.
Okay. Police interviewed Haran yesterday in Cooperstown, New York, where the officer recently bought a vacation home, the police source said. Suffolk police obtained a search warrant and used 2 bomb-sniffing dogs to search Haran's Long Island home yesterday, said Kevin Cronin, a homicide detective who supervised the search. Wustenhoff's wife, a 14-year-old son, and 10 and 12-year-old daughters have been in hiding since the bombing because of speculation it had been revenge. Oh, the things that family went through.
Yeah. And what's really troubling is the guy's a bomb tech, and you're going to go and look for evidence related to a bomb. That's like saying to the Pizza Hut delivery guy, we're going to do some investigation to see if there's any pepperoni in your background,
Right.
It's a weird, tough challenge.
Yeah. But there's also this aspect, Mike, of this is a cop. Like, I get it. You're upset about, someone sleeping with your wife or whatever was going on around this. And honestly, what's kind of worse than that, I've had email communication with the daughters where I've learned that this is a guy that was around their family. Like, they would have barbecues together and stuff like that. This is not some just out there off the wall situation. Like, this guy spent time with those children. His children played with Dennis's children. They were friends, I mean, this is just, it's so heartbreaking on so many levels.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Well, and I'm even finding comments where certain officers are making statements like, well, messing around on your wife is one thing, but messing around on your wife with another cop's lady, that's just a whole different thing. And almost like it's a justification for, well, what are we saying? That it makes sense that this guy then has the right to go and place a bomb in someone's car? Like, it just...
I'm with you. This is a murder investigation. It's not And the same thing happens when somebody says, "Oh, well, that prostitute that was killed was a prostitute."
Right.
Well, who cares?
Right.
She was murdered. You know. Yeah, I get kind of enraged by that kind of thinking.
I almost believe it's like a protection feature for some people that they can't allow themselves. They're looking for reasons to not get close to a story. That they're looking for reasons to just distance themselves from it. Oh, well, I can't care about that person because they were doing this,
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a great protection system. It just keeps you out of caring about the world. And how can that be a good point? Agony in Blue, obviously the title of the Sunday Newsday here for February 25th, 1990. Kind of touching on what we were just talking about a little bit. I've heard frequently that there's a brotherhood. We've kind of talked about that just a little bit. You guys have each other's backs. We know that you're taking on this immense task in terms of policing and all the different things you're expected to do. But what happens in a situation like this? Like, is there any internal conflict? I mean, Mike, if you were a friend, because the other thing is there's guys that Haran talked to that later came forward and said, "Oh my God, Haran said that he was going to kill someone because someone was sleeping with his wife." If someone had come to you and said something like that, where does your, where's that line for you? At what point do you act on it? What side do you take on it? Like, what's, as a police officer?
Yeah. So, I've been, I think, blessed, John, that I've always been able to separate my love of people and my disdain for certain behaviors, and kind of the love the sinner, hate the sin kind of thing,
Yeah.
And my experience has been good cops hate bad cops worse than anyone else might possibly. Not only because it doesn't tarnish what you have worked so hard to be a part of, but it is just such a perversion of what you went into this business for. So if you hear of somebody that's doing that, even if it's someone that's close to you, a good cop will sit down with their buddy and say, "Hey, let's go in together if we have to, but we're going in. We're going to go talk to somebody. We're going to get this out." And you know what? Every cop makes mistakes. I can't tell you how many mistakes I made, how many times I arrested somebody and it was a little too strongly, or as I learned and matured. And I'll tell you what, bottom line is no one hates a dirty cop worse than a good cop.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of an interesting point of this too. I mean, here we are over 30 years later. This case hasn't been solved, but is there enough evidence? I mean, we've got a situation that seems to call to it. We know Haran also went and spoke to the supervisors in Suffolk to complain about Dennis having this relationship. Let's see what else we can learn as we get into the articles here. So he winds up hiring an ex-DA for his attorney. A Nassau County cop suspected of the car bomb killing of a narcotics detective yesterday hired a prominent criminal attorney who quickly proclaimed the suspect's innocence. Robert Haran denies any involvement in the crime, said Stephen Scarring. His attorney makes another statement over in the Daily News. The attorney predicted federal tests on bomb fragments found at the scene and material taken in a meticulous sweep of Haran's home would prove nothing. I'm confident they are not going to find any evidence in the house because there is no evidence for them to find. And that is kind of a big question in this case. What is the evidence? What could they find to piece this together? To your point, this is a guy that works with explosives. If they find traces of explosives, that's really not going to be surprising. But then we get this article, and this article really has most of what I consider the strongest evidence that has come out publicly about this case. So let's step through this one by one. And starting with the big image, you can see they've got a Chevy Suburban parked in a driveway there. Traces of a powerful commercial explosive have been found both on the car in which an undercover narcotics detective was killed and on the front rug of the vehicle regularly used by the key target of the investigation, sources familiar with the probe said yesterday. Haran emerged as a target because of reports that Suffolk narcotics detective Wustenhoff had been having an affair with Haran's wife. Information linking the white Suburban used by Haran to the same explosive used to blow up Wustenhoff's Cadillac Eldorado was transmitted several days ago by federal investigators. The explosive is known commercially as Tovex. Are you familiar with Tovex at all?
I am not, John.
Okay. Yeah, I did a quick little search on it. Tovex is a water gel explosive that has several advantages over traditional dynamite, including lower toxicity and safer manufacture, transport, and storage.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, and if you look down at the applications for it, I mean, it's used for like cutting into mountains, and I mean there's avalanche control, just all these industrial uses, and basically it has replaced dynamite because it's so much safer in terms of its use. Mining for minerals, it's used in quarries, tunneling, and improvised explosive devices is even listed here as well.
For directed blasts, probably.
Yeah. So that is what Tovex is, and they found Tovex basically at the scene. Now they found it in the carpet in this vehicle. Investigators have been looking for a link between the bombing and the car. The car is actually registered to Haran's father-in-law, but it is frequently used by Haran. And here's another twist in this. It was allegedly spotted by a person who told investigators a few days after the bombing. So, and I want to get this right because the phrasing on the sentence is kind of clunky. He talked to investigators a few days after the bombing and said that he was almost struck by this vehicle as it sped away from Wustenhoff's North Patchogue neighborhood.
Yeah, and I actually thought that was a day or so before the bombing, but I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, and he's saying it was several hours before the explosion. They're being kind of vague here in terms of it, but and what's strange about it is this guy almost gets, effectively run over by this car. It grabs his attention enough that he checks out the license plate, and the license plate is a vanity plate. It says DM Ranch on it. And this car isn't supposed to be there. Haran lives about 30 miles away from this. So what's the car doing over there at that point? Why is it driving in that manner in particular and almost running over a pedestrian who then notes it and recalls it? It's just such a strange linkage to think some random guy on a street happened to recall that particular vanity plate, and it ties back to this story in this way. It seems substantial to me.
Huge. Yeah.
I mean, is it even still circumstantial at that point? I mean, how solid does evidence have to get?
It absolutely is circumstantial, and we can go into that circumstantial evidence discussion if you'd like. But
yeah. Well, let's get through the other points on this, because there's a couple more things that come out on this. We get some more detail here about his work with the emergency services unit, but in particular, his unit is known to have access to that same explosive, to Tovex. In their offices, they've got some supply of this Tovex, and they note that some quantity has gone missing from the department supplies. So, I mean, just start tracing this, just start putting the pieces together. We've got
kind of like Clue, isn't it?
I don't know. Like, it seems so much stronger. It blows my mind that here we are 31 years later, and it's like, wait, what happened with this? But to your point, you have Haran that works in this field. Maybe he's been exposed to that before. Maybe the Tovex wiped off on his shoe, and that's how it got on the rug, and it's from a separate instance. I think the biggest challenge here is, there was one case that we talked about on the channel. I can't remember the specifics, but it was essentially solved by like a pea pod that was found in the back of a truck, because they were able to do a DNA test on the pea pod and said, oh, it came from this particular tree where the body was found. There's no, I think when you're talking about a chemical of this nature, it's not a one-to-one match. I don't think you can really boil it down to, we know that this Tovex that was used in the explosion is the exact same batch that is missing from the police department. And that is the exact same batch found on the rug of the vehicle. I think that would make it a lot different. But still some very big pieces that
So
seem
that's one of the cool things with the fact that cold cases are not necessarily an enemy of law enforcement, because could today's forensic capabilities determine the chemical composition of that particular batch of Tovex?
right.
And could that be the link that ties the two pieces together that says, oh, a quarter cup of sugar was forgotten in the ingredients on that particular batch, still was able to blow up,
Right.
but it changed the chemical composition. So you start thinking how much is happening on the forensic side and re-examining, and do they even have that evidence still to re-examine?
Yeah. Yeah. It is also noting here that Haran's specific job duties for emergency services would not have put him in contact with the explosive. They don't really go into the details around that. And I've seen other information talking about his training, which kind of alludes to the fact that he was trained for handling explosive devices. So it's a little conflicting, but we've also got his lawyer that's, kind of contributing on this article as well. His lawyer actually says here his client was not involved in the bombing, and that explosive traces would only have been found in the vehicle Haran used if it had been tampered with. So his lawyer is starting to point towards a possible defense of, this information being placed or this evidence being placed there. All right, Mike. So from that article and another little piece I found, here's kind of the roundup in terms of what seems like pretty strong evidence. We've got the Tovex found in Dennis's car and in the vehicle that Haran had access to and was known to drive, even though it was owned by his father-in-law. We've got a man almost hit by that car, says that it's basically fleeing Dennis's neighborhood. The guy remembers the vanity plate, and that's how they track it back. There is an interesting question that the attorney brings up about that. He's like, do you think that a cop in particular that's going to try to pull this off would take a vehicle that had a vanity plate? It's an interesting question.
It's not registered to him.
That's an interesting point as well. Haran had access, well, at least his department had access to Tovex. Some of that goes missing from the department supplies. Supposedly, Haran shouldn't have been able to acquire those department supplies, but I don't know if did he have a friend let him in there, or did he figure out some way to get around the protections around those supplies? I don't know. I think that's a possible consideration.
So I served on the SWAT team, and I'll just say, John, we had to manage and maintain the explosive devices that we used whenever we did door breaches and other things. And that could be everything from linear flex charges to other kinds of moldable explosives. All you need to do is do a little bit less during training, and you can start pocketing things. We see officers that keep a little extra ammunition when they go to the range and figure I'll go back and practice a little later or something. All might be perfectly legitimate reasons, but just the fact that he wouldn't have access to go in and check out a box load of this,
right?
It would be more important to me to understand what is he exposed to during training. What would he have had other opportunity to get?
Yeah. I also did find a Newsday article that noted that they did find tools from his department at his home. And there was actually, they were considering filing charges possibly just for that. It seemed like he had taken some tools, effectively stolen tools, and taken them home. Do you know if he's ever officially been cleared? Like, I ran searches just on him, and I can't find anything that is saying that he's ever left being a suspect or a person of interest.
I don't know of anything to say one way or another.
Yeah. So what do you think in terms of that information? Let's have that conversation about circumstantial evidence. What are we looking at here with these pieces?
Yeah, you go back and you look at this, and some of this is by memory, so please correct me where I'm wrong.
Hmm.
But let's start back at the kinds of evidence that police deal with. There are four basic kinds of evidence. The first is forensic evidence. The blood at the scene, the type of composition of material in the blast, or I mean in the explosive itself, a fingerprint, something like that is physical and forensic in nature. Then we have things like eyewitness, and in this case, we have a neighbor who sees a vehicle that is tied back to a suspect. That's an eyewitness account. Now, some people think eyewitness is the holy grail, and it's like one of my least favorite of the forms of evidence, because you think about how we can be influenced by our own biases. He's a cop, there's no way he could do this, or he was the pizza delivery guy that I've always given a tip to, there's no way he would be a mugger. We are so influenced by our biases and our life experiences, but you can't discount eyewitness. You have a colleague who says, holy cow, a cop told me another cop's having an affair with his wife and he's going to kill, or not even that. It says my wife's having an affair, I'm going to kill that guy. Doesn't mention anything else. Eyewitness accounts, in this case, there's good eyewitness accounts. There's good physical evidence. We have confession is a form of evidence that law enforcement relies on. We don't have confession, but sometimes we have the information that's given through admissions of things, or, well, yeah, I was in the area, but I was dropping off some pizza to the guy or something like that. Those kinds of things that aren't necessarily confessions, but are weighted as a confession piece of evidence. And and then you have circumstantial evidence, that thing that says, you know what, to a normal guy, A plus B always equals C.
Yeah.
And if I've got a guy who is having an affair with another guy's wife, that's a connection. If I have explosives that are exactly the same as explosives that are available to someone, that's a connection. If I have a device that's used that I would think somewhere in training, there's something to support that a person would have the mental and the physical ability to create a device similar to what killed Dennis Wustenhoff, then that's a huge piece of circumstantial evidence. And so circumstantial is that stuff that just says, if all of this is true, when you combine it, it says, how on earth could this not be true?
Right.
And in the criminal environment, it's probable cause. Do you believe there's enough evidence?
Mm-hmm.
Why this hasn't gone to a grand jury and resulted in an indictment is really intriguing. Is there something we're missing, or is it just that a prosecutor hasn't had enough to make them feel comfortable to step over the edge, or frankly, the courage? And we see that. I mean, I saw on Court TV the other night an expert saying that more than 500 murders have been concluded in the last 100 years in the United States on circumstantial evidence. So this thing is not out of reach when it comes to circumstantial. And normal people like you and me and everyone that's listening to us can say A plus B just seems to equal C.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Now, the fifth one that nobody talks about very much, and the one that I spend a lot of my career studying, is behavioral evidence. And now you start to look at all the behavior involved, and you just apply that behavior. And so what you do, when a profiler, for instance, looks at a criminal case, they take those four forms of evidence, they like to just set them on a shelf for a short season. Then they go back and they look at the case, they kind of vicariously roll in the dirt, and they think about, what was the emotion here? Why did that happen this way? Why was it in the car? Why would it potentially have been Valentine's Day? What happened? And all of that behavior, when it's combined with the traditional forms of evidence really, really help paint a picture.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very enlightening. And thank you so much for breaking that out for us like that. I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it in that way. And I really appreciate that. That's why we have you here, Mike. And I'm sure that's why we're going to have you back when I'm looking into other cases that
I hope that I'm back for a lot of them, because I love working with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I say something about this picture?
Yeah.
I've actually heard people say there's not a lot of damage. We watch television and we see cars explode into a bazillion pieces.
Yeah.
There's a phenomenon in shaken babies called the shaken baby syndrome, where the brain actually rocks back and forth in the head, and it tears away as the baby is being shaken. And that's kind of a graphic image to put in our mind. But that thing's called the contra coup effect. And basically what happens is it just causes trauma inside the brain that then causes swelling and kills the baby. In cases where there's blunt force, traffic accidents where the body looks perfectly well, until you get to the autopsy and open it up and it is just exploded inside.
Yeah.
That's what happens when a bomb is detonated. That blast, that force isn't so much just the projectiles that are coming through the air, but it's that sound wave of absolute trauma that's coming through. Imagine poor guy what he went through, John.
Oh, no, I know. And from what I understand, there was severe damage to his legs. Here, I think you can get a little better sense in this picture of, you can see the roof, the force just like pushed the roof up. It just really, really buckled it. But is there also a tell in this about the fact that someone built a device that was so directed, so specifically trying to only harm Dennis and not harm anyone else around? And what type of person would care about not harming the other people in the area? To the point of, if Haran really did spend time with their family, knew the kids, saw them playing with his kids, did he put in the forethought of, I got to make this device very specific. It's got to do this only. And I have to make sure it's not going to do anything else outside of that.
Yeah, that's really insightful.
This is just, it's such a heartbreaking case.
Don't you just love those girls?
Yeah. No. And thank you so much for introducing me to them. And, I'm really looking forward. We're going to have them on here pretty soon to really, it's one thing for you and I to kind of talk about almost from the brain of this case. Getting to the heart of this case is really understanding the story of what the family went through, what those girls faced. And someone that I think is a little bit of an unsung hero in this, what a mother to go through this, pull that family together, get out on the other side, raise such good people that are contributing back. His son is an officer. His son is still serving. Mike, I wanted to ask you about this picture. Can you tell the audience what this is?
I can tell you exactly what it is. It's the east wall of the officer memorial. I know it's the east wall because looking from this direction behind me and across the plazas, the Washington, D.C. Police Department, the red building in front of it is a doorway I've walked through 100 times going to D.C. Metropolitan Transit. I have scratched names on with a pencil on that wall on the east side. But this one is really touching to me because there are a number of lions that surround the memorial in statues. And the one at the end of this wall is particularly touching. And last time I was there, right adjacent to this, where you've got this shot from, were 4 California police officers with the door of a black and white police unit with all the signatures of the officers in marker on it, as they were there to pay tribute to one of their officers. So,
Yeah. I'm coming to understand how much this means to people, and just seeing your response to this. I can guarantee you the next time I'm in Washington, D.C., I'm stopping here. And I understand there's also a museum that's part of this as well.
Yeah, behind us is the National Law Enforcement Memorial Museum. It is actually a two-story, goes underground, one story. It's a really touching place. Yeah, you gotta go hit them both, and I expect a picture when you're there.
Absolutely. And I will also, I'm going to have to try that. I didn't know what you were talking about. I heard you talk about scratching before. I didn't know what you meant. So you're meaning getting like an etching, putting paper over and then etching the
Yeah,
engraving.
and when you go, there's a directory there. There are slips of paper and little pencils, and go look up Dennis's name. It'll show you which wall he's on and which particular location, and go over and scratch his name, because one day he's going to be really grateful for what you've done.
Yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we can give you a little shortcut on it here on the website. Heroes Live Forever. They have a profile about Dennis, and they tell us the memorial panel is 9E14. The
The
National.
girl promised me they were going to update his photos. So hopefully by the time this airs, when people pull it up, they're going to see Dennis's photo on there too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. We got to get that in there. The National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial ensures that those who made the ultimate sacrifice are remembered for generations to come, while providing a place where survivors can spend a quiet moment paying tribute to their loved ones. And it's located in Washington, D.C., adjacent to the National Law Enforcement Museum. I'm really
Yeah,
looking
that
forward to
picture is
getting there.
actually looking south. There's a metro station. You go right down the steps to, and then if you look, the buildings to the south are the Metropolitan Police Department and the museum.
Awesome. Awesome. Mike, where can people find you? Where can they find out more about Profiling Evil?
Oh, heck, please look us up on YouTube, or just at Profiling Evil will get you to us, and profilingevil.com, and or just watch for me here on John's channel, because I hope to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely going to bring you back. I really appreciate your time, all the insight. Thank you so much for reaching out, for starting this friendship. I'm enjoying it. I really appreciate having a friend like you that I can reach out to if I've got questions on this law enforcement front to try to understand all this stuff better. And I think what you're doing at Profiling Evil is great. Keep up the awesome work over there. And
Well,
I'll be joining you back over there at some point
you
too.
you will be, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate your mentorship. You have helped me navigate this wacky world of YouTube and socializing, and what a powerful tool this is. I hope law enforcement figures out how to leverage it more appropriately.
We're going to keep working on that. It comes up every time you and I get together, and we're going to keep talking about that until we figure that out for sure.
Thanks, John.
And interesting that you brought up social media, because we're going to be talking to some people here next about how social media might have helped push this case into a whole different direction and got some renewed attention.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I would just add that sometimes it takes people a lifetime to get the courage to step forward. And so even though we're now 30 years later, there is no reason why someone can't step forward and say, I know something, and solve this case.
Absolutely. A big thank you to Mike King for joining us from Profiling Evil. Here is the family 30 years later. On the left, we have Dennis's wife, Fran, his son, Kevin, up at the top. Over on the right, daughter, Jen, and below, daughter, Melissa. And as you can see from this picture, they're serious. They're on a mission. Let's look at some articles here. Bronx.news12.com. This is from January 31st, 2020. The children of a slain Suffolk detective are demanding justice for their father. Wustenhoff's kids, Melissa, Jennifer, and Kevin Wustenhoff, and his wife, Fran Wustenhoff, say 30 years of heartbreak have not kept them from seeking justice. Each year, the family says the anniversary of their father and husband's death is a painful reminder that never fades. Quote, you grow up trying so hard to forget this awful, horrific thing happened, but it's like a cancer in your chest, says his son, Kevin. The Wustenhoff family says they have gained a lot of support and attention from those who want to help in the case. Obviously, people like myself and Mike King, but also a lot of other people. Over at Patch.com, family uses social media to draw attention to a cold case. Only 3 weeks after starting a social media campaign to bring new awareness to the case, Melissa Wustenhoff Skelsey says some of the biggest developments in years in the cold case have brought renewed hope and optimism to the grieving family. Last week, the Suffolk County Police announced the FBI will review the case and a $10,000 reward is being offered for any information leading to an arrest. They've been pushing hard on the social media front for over a year at this point. They're going to keep pushing here, right now. Joining me are Dennis's daughters, Melissa and Jen. Thank you so much for joining us here on BrainScratch.
Thank you, John, for having us. We appreciate this.
You got it. I know this is a tough situation to talk about. I just really appreciate how much you've been working. I can see all the work you did over at Profiling Evil, but also there's been a lot of media. It seems like a resurgence of media over the past year and a half or so. And I can tell that your family is working very hard to take advantage of that attention, re-raise the exposure, and hopefully get the right phone call to happen, the tip to get called in, the missing piece to get filled. But I wanted to go back a little bit and just help people understand what this was like to go through when you were younger. So who was living at the home at that time? Is it 5 of you? Is that right?
Yes, it was my mom, my dad, myself, and my brother and sister. We have a brother, Kevin. He's in between my sister and I.
Okay. And if you could just tell us a little bit about your father. I got some sense of him through the articles, but obviously not a very personal, like what were some of his favorite things to do, hobbies, interests?
He was just a regular, awesome guy. Loved to watch the Yankees, collected some special baseball cards, loved to eat steak. He was a hunter, he was a runner. He loved sports in general. He loved, going to our events. I played sports. My sister had dancing. My brother ran track. Just, your regular, average, awesome dad.
Yeah. What about for you, Melissa? You had any different thoughts or feelings on that?
Same thing. Motorcycles. He liked to ride Harleys. That was a big thing. For him, he would go out riding. He would take us on little rides around the block. We would go to car shows and things like that. So, back when they used to just like hold car shows in like parking lots, I don't know if they really do that anymore, but he always was into like kind of old cars and cleaning his car and, just constantly taking care of his, all his things that he liked to collect. The yard, he would be out there raking the dirt, making it perfect. Always made sure he had a nice home. Wasn't the biggest home, but it was always tidy and he made it the best that he could.
For someone that, grew up through the 80s, looking through some of the pictures just took me right back. I mean, your dad was like, the image of 80s cool, basically, in some of these photos.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of his work, would that take him away from home often? Was he around a lot? How did he manage that balance with both of you?
He definitely worked. He had, not an odd schedule, but it could be nighttime, weekends. But he did have time off as well. And he made sure to be involved with whatever it is that we were doing. So whether it was like Jen mentioned, dance, recital, sports, even just like a family party, he was always there. He was very involved with his job, but very involved with his family and didn't miss out on anything.
Nice.
Yeah, I felt like he always had a regular work schedule, but it wasn't until I was older I realized,
that's why I'm saying I didn't think it was weird. Yeah, I didn't think it was weird then. I just know it was like an off schedule now. But like then I just felt like, oh, okay, like if he worked really late and he slept in a little extra longer in the morning, we would just say bye to him while he was like sleeping in bed, you know, if he worked like late overnight or something, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, because this is, you know, narcotics undercover work. I mean, I bet he's working nights somewhat regularly. I know that you were pretty young when this was all happening, but families in law enforcement frequently worry about, you know, is my loved one going to not come home one day? Did you guys have a sense of that, or did everything feel much easier and safer back then to you?
For me personally, I feel like I always felt safe. I actually felt like extra safe knowing my father was like a police officer. And I don't know, I just never felt, yes, I was young. I was 10 when he died, but like even up to that point, I just never felt worried or anything about anything. Like it just felt safe.
Yeah, I agree. I always felt extra safe also. And especially, I mean, I never even really realized his job was considered a dangerous job even.
Yeah.
And particularly that he was in narcotics, you know, his beeper would go off and we'd all yell beeper, and he would say, I have to go call a bad guy. And, you know, he would do that. He would go to a payphone and call a bad guy. And really, we just kind of thought that was a little silly, but I guess that's because he made it seem silly and he made it, you know, not scary. So I never was really aware that his job was as dangerous as it is. Obviously now I know, but I certainly didn't feel it then.
Yeah. And I think at that age, he didn't necessarily discuss with us like, oh, this is what I did. I was in the car with some drug dealer with a gun to my head or something, you know, like he just went to work. We knew he like took like helped get rid of the bad guys, and that was it, you know. And you never didn't ever, I think, like that he would die because of his job or anything like that, you know.
Yeah It really seems like, just knowing his experience and kind of getting to learn a little bit about him through you guys, that he seemed pretty strong in terms of compartmentalizing his life. And, you know, he's working in undercover, so he's admittedly, he's got to have kind of a dual life type situation going on. But to know that he's even kind of buffering the reality of that with you guys. I mean, this is a guy that served in Vietnam and then came and served his community in a pretty rough job like that. But
I know it kind of stinks that we can't like talk to him about that and be like, whoa, you're pretty like badass, but like we never knew it because you were just so warm and loving and cool and fun. And like I couldn't picture that because he was just so normal, that not that you'd be abnormal if you were doing that job, but you know what I mean? He was just they're such a family guy, like that I wish I could say to him, like, oh my God, this is crazy what you were doing, you know, like, what are you, nuts? But,
or what are you, Superman? I mean, it's really, we're talking about someone where we all look at our father and they're bigger than life. They have all the answers. They're able to handle all the situations, but you're literally hearing from him, oh wait, I got to go call a bad guy. You know, I'm out catching bad guys tonight. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. Do you have a favorite memory, each of you, with your father that you could share with us?
I was in either 4th or 5th grade. And like my sister mentioned earlier, our dad rode Harleys all the time. There was always at least one Harley in the garage. And we loved to go on them. We used to go on rides as much as we could. And I remember I wanted him to pick me up from school on the Harley. And I begged him. And he said, okay, well, if it's nice weather, I'll pick you up. And sure enough, I came out on the last day of school. It was a beautiful day. And there he was. And I got to get on the bike, put on my helmet. And all my friends saw me leave on the Harley. And I don't know, I was the coolest person ever. We went not far. We just went a couple miles. And there was an old time drugstore nearby where you could get fountain sodas and ice creams and things like that. And that's what we did. We had ice cream sodas, and then we went home. And just, I don't know, that just sticks with me for some reason.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a pretty awesome memory. I think that would stick with me too.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. How about it, Melissa? How about for you?
My memory is pretty simple. It's not extravagant or anything like that. I would say some of my best memories with my dad wasn't like at a place or going someplace or anything like that. It was just being at home when he was home. Um, we would just sit with him on the couch, and he would like lay down, and he had long hair, as you could see from pictures and stuff like that. And he would let us put ponytails and pigtails in his hair. We would braid his hair. This is my sister's part of this memory as well, but he would
he would let us brush.
Yeah. I would be like the little hair salon, you know. He was like laying on the couch. I'd be, you know, sitting behind him, just doing whatever, braids in his hair. Like, he just let us do whatever. He also had some tattoos on him, and we would get like a paintbrush. You know, later on thinking about this, probably benefited him more because the hair brushing probably felt good, and the, you know, but we would take a little tiny paintbrush from a little watercolor set, and I would pretend to fill in his tattoos and paint them. And actually, at the time, speaking of the 80s earlier, we would use there was the TV Guide, the little magazine, and I would pretend that the TV Guide was the palette, and I would take the colors from the picture and you know, kind of dab, you know, paint, and then fill in his tattoos. And he just let us do all, you know, like I said, it's simple memory, but we did it all the time, and it was just so much fun, and he just let us do whatever. It was just,
Yeah.
you know, and like Jen said earlier with Yankees, we would just sit, you know, on the couch, and he would watch a Yankee game, and, you know, I'd sit at the end by his feet. Sometimes I put my feet by him, and he'd crack my toes. He'd crack little knuckles, which sounds strange, but it was like funny. I don't know. So
Yeah.
that's, you know, just him being at home, hanging out was some of the best times.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for being someone else that remembers TV Guide, because I worked there for a while. And by the time I worked there, people were like, "What's TV Guide?" Because I was there in like 2010 or something.
Funny. I know there's probably young people watching this right now.
They're like,
right.
TV Guide.
Yeah, what's a TV Guide? What are you guys talking about?
The crossword in the back was the best part.
Oh
Yeah. Okay. So now we get to the point where tragedy strikes. How old are each of you when this happens?
I was 14.
Okay.
Our husband was 12. And like Melissa said, she was 10.
Okay. 11:55 a.m., February 15th. The car explodes in front of the house. Did you ever travel in that car? Now, this is his Cadillac for work, right? His undercover car. Is that something that he would use with the family at all, or?
Never. I mean, luckily, never. And that's also part of why, you know, it just corroborates the targeted side of this, because whoever did this probably was pretty confident they were not going to hurt one of us.
Right.
You know, just specifically for him. So on occasion, I would start the car to like warm it up in the morning and stuff, because I was older and I was interested in driving. I couldn't wait to turn 16 to get my permit. I know I was a ways off, but every now and then my mom or my dad would let me start one of the cars on a cold day. And that's maybe about it. Otherwise, I really don't have any memories of us going in any of his undercover cars, because he was very clear about them being for work only.
For work only. He parked him in the street. They never even went in the driveway. He was just very, you know, safe when it comes to that, even like with the rules or whatever, you know. He just it was just an off limits car. I kind of almost didn't even pay attention to the cars, because they didn't really like exist almost. Okay.
And there is some question about, you know, we've spoken a bit about the love triangle aspect to this, and the day before being Valentine's Day. Do you guys think that Valentine's Day was likely the target date? Do you think that was meant to send a message?
I do.
I definitely do. I think
dental otherwise.
Yeah, you know? Because the day before, he was February 14th, he was due to work. He at the last minute decided to take off, and we do feel that, you know, that was intended for Valentine's Day to send a message.
Okay. And something else happened. Why did he take that day off?
I was in 5th grade, and it was the father-daughter dance for Valentine's Day. So he had taken off to take me to that dance. So,
wow.
Yep.
Okay. One thing that I'm kind of seeing conflicting information on, some of the older articles are talking about the transmission actually being where the bomb was placed, and that it was likely when the car was put into gear and started rolling forward, that's what set it off. Other articles are saying they're kind of, I think it's the simple assumption that, when he went to start the car, that's what ignited the bomb. Do you know, have you heard anything in terms of the investigation for which one of those is accurate, or if it's something else in terms of what triggers it?
We have heard different things, but unfortunately, because it's an open investigation, it's not really something we can comment on.
Okay. Okay.
We do have certain knowledge, but we don't want to jeopardize the case because it is open and active. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted to see if we could clear it up, because it's being kind of told. I think I'm seeing 3 different ways it's actually being told. But and then in some of the press, they're saying that there is a firefighter that lives nearby that's the first to respond. Is that Brian Curry? Is that who they're referring to?
No.
Okay, there's someone else first.
Yeah, it was our next door neighbor.
Okay.
He was inside his house at the time, and he heard a huge explosion. And obviously, the first thing that comes to your mind is not a car outside exploding, but he assumed his oil burner had exploded. So he went down to the basement, I guess, to check and see, and there was nothing, obviously down there. And I guess he immediately went to look outside, and my understanding is that he saw just basically debris, smoke, whatever you would see after, an explosion. So I guess, he had called 911 and went out there. I'm not really sure exactly his exact timeline, but yeah. And then he just immediately ran out there, and I guess being his friend and also a firefighter, he just kind of went into maybe whatever kind of rescue mode, and just immediately.
I believe he pulled the car.
Yeah, I think he pulled him through
the
window, is my understanding.
Yeah, fortunately, look at some of those news articles. Something that's engraved in my brain is if you look at particularly the color pictures, you can unfortunately see my dad's blood on the door.
Oh, wow.
And
that's always something that bothered. That's always something that bothered me. And I remember being little and saying to you guys, oh, is that blood on the car? And everybody telling me no, because I was just 10 years old. And I think they didn't want me to have this gruesome, vision in my mind. But in the back of my mind, I always kind of knew that's what it was. And obviously, as I got older and learned that's what it was,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, he basically went into rescue mode at that point, and, tried to help him.
Have you ever asked him what your father said at that time? Because he's actually talking when this is going on, right?
I think, but he was awake. I think he kind of, we've been told from a couple of different people who are on the scene that he said, tell my wife I love her, tell the children I love them. I think he said something, referring to that he knew he was dying. He said, I'm dying. So he,
I think a lot of it was he was kind of going into, saying things like, I think he was like people, assuming flashback to Vietnam and things like that, because he was conscious and he was talking and he knew what was happening. And my understanding is the neighbor was just reassuring him, no, you're, stay with me, and we're going to get you through this. And I think, he had to, I think they even made a joke together from what my brother told me, because he kind of had to look and see what kind of damage was going on. down there and the lower extremities. And, you know, he tried to make a joke about it. Like, I got to check, you know. So I think there was some pretty extensive conversation going on between them. So he was alive and knew what was happening.
So, yeah, we're talking about a serious blast. The news reports are saying debris was found up to 200 feet away. And I was wondering, with a blast of that nature, was there any other damage that occurred? I mean, the car is parked right in front of your house, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you refer to any of those news clippings, you can see, obviously, there's debris from the vehicle just in the street. My dad used to have fuzzy dice on the mirror, and those are actually on the ground in front of the car. So, you know, you can see some of those things, but also on our house, all the windows were blown out. On our neighbor's house, all the windows were blown out. So we would, for a very, very long time, pick up these little teeny tiny pieces of glass out of the lawn. Our friends would come over, we would pick up glass. I remember initially we weren't allowed back to the house because it was a crime scene. So I remember when we came home, finally, over a week later, in my bedroom, I don't know why this sticks with me. I mean, well, I do know why, but I used to have all my like sports awards framed and hanging on the wall, and they were all just sort of slanted and crooked. So the things on my walls were crooked. There was damage to our front lawn because there were cranes and trucks and things, and who knows what was on the lawn. So we had this weird dirt patch that then became grass, and it didn't want to grow. So we would have green grass and brown grass, and just another reminder of, you know, the damage that was done. Yeah. So that's some of the physical stuff we would sort of see on the regular.
There was a man named Brian Curry who was a firefighter, also a columnist for a local paper. And I guess the paper asked him to write about this instance, and he couldn't do the paper that the editor, or the column that the editor wanted, but he kind of put out this other column just talking about the patch in the street, the patch that where they repave. And essentially, you know, way after the event happens, he's saying hi to the family, or he's saying hi to you guys, or, you know, saying hi to your mother. And there's just that constant reminder of the big patch in the street. Do you guys?
Yeah, I mean, they had to remove piece of the road itself for evidence purposes, and I guess just probably damaged in that part anyway. So there was this big, like, rectangular patch in front of our house. I mean, just so different looking than the rest of the road. So it's just a constant reminder, you know, walking to your friend's house or playing on the front lawn, or we all used to play kickball in front of our house. And when my dad was alive, he was even involved in the kickball games, you know, all the dad across the street, the whole neighborhood. We were very close with a lot of kids, and everybody was, you know, friendly. You know, then once he wasn't there anymore, it was okay. Well, we're going to run bases, and it would be like, you're like standing on the patch, basically. It was just like very odd, you know, just a constant reminder of that's the spot, you know, where it happened.
Did your family, or did your mother, consider at some point, hey, I got to get the kids out of this house, we got to move? How long were you there?
We were only there about another 2 years. I think that's exactly what happened. I think my mom, you know, needed to get out of that spot, and we stayed in the same school district. I mean, she didn't want to like pull us out of what was normal for us as best as possible. We literally moved a mile away.
Oh, wow.
So for the most part, we were still, you know, with our friends. And I think my sister had to change a middle school, but, you know, essentially we were still in the same neighborhood. And I think my mom needed to do that. But at the time, you know, I personally wanted to keep staying in the house because that's where I grew up. But I get it now.
Well, that must have been tough too. All the memories are there, right?
Yeah, because it was kind of like a bittersweet thing. It was like, I'll never forget that day. Like, we moved because it had so many great memories, but so many terrible memories. And I remember not wanting to like leave that day. We closed, we moved, you know, the truck was packed. We were ready to go over to the new house. And I remember I didn't leave. I asked my mom if I could stay with the neighbors and play with the kids. And I stayed with them because I didn't want to leave, but yet it was terrible being there, you know? And I think it even took her that much time to leave just because, you know, in the beginning phases, I don't even think she was even capable of like, just like even functioning to try to even sell a house or look for a house. It took her so long to even get the, I guess, motivation to even, you know, want to do anything really, because in the beginning she was just so sad and depressed. It was, and obviously she was still sad and depressed, but you know, you think, oh, I get up and move the next month. It was just, she could barely, you know, move from room to room, let alone move her house, you know? So. Yeah.
And I bumped into another article where there's a quote from Michael Mahoney talking about the funeral. And of course, thousands literally turn up. Some reports say up to 5,000 people turned up for the funeral. You've got helicopters flying over. The quote said, "The children didn't want to leave their father at the end of the service." When I saw that, I felt outraged by his death all over again. And I'm just hearing that kind of echoing even with this. You don't want to leave the house. Yes, it has that terrible memory attached to it, but there's also all the good, warm memories that are part of that as well. And literally here you guys are 30 years later, and it shows what a powerful love you have for your father. You still haven't left him. You're still bringing him along every day and in these new efforts. And thankfully you're finally getting some attention, which we'll be talking about a little bit as we go here. But back to then, so does your family, and you initially go into hiding effectively after?
Yeah, because immediately after, it was sort of assumed that it was, you know, drug related, that it was a drug dealer, one of his past cases, you know, that it was a bad guy.
Right.
Also, our house was a crime scene. So we couldn't go there for basically those two reasons. A, it was a crime scene, and B, they didn't know if somebody was after us. So we went to a family member's house, and they basically set up a command post out front. There was detectives in the house all the time. I can remember we literally had nothing with us because we were all in school that day. Mm-hmm. So we just literally had the clothes on our back. We weren't allowed to go home to get any of our clothes. At one point, I don't know if it was that day, the next day, a couple of days later, I'm not sure, you know, there was a detective who went to the house for us and, you know, got us our special stuffed animals or whatever we kind of needed to feel comfortable. But yeah, at the family member's house we were staying, we weren't allowed to go outside. We weren't allowed, they didn't want us to watch the TV because it was on all the news channels.
Oh yeah.
But we watched anyway.
Yeah, we did. We would sneak into another room because, you know, even literally leaving the hospital the day it happened and, you know, we're in shock and we just found out our dad died and oh my God. And now we're leaving the hospital to go where we were going and it was on the radio in the car.
Yeah. Well, this was huge. I mean, it was national. Like I was going through the old articles and it's literally just across the whole nation. Everyone is talking about it. So yeah, it was a huge, huge story.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can't really escape it at that point, but there's also a piece of you that's still looking for connections to your father, right? And those little pieces of information are in some way still connection with your father.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we try to, you know, keep his memory alive, the good parts. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, unfortunately, he was murdered. So we do have to talk about that also.
Yeah.
But, you know, we don't want him to just be known as the guy who was murdered, essentially. You know, he was our dad. He was my mom's husband. He was the guy who liked Harleys, you know.
Yeah.
So that's, you know. we want it to be solved. Obviously, that's our main goal.
I mean,
because
I think the most important thing is when you hear all this stuff and he was a police officer and it's 31 years later, and what do you mean it's not solved? How is this not solved? First of all, it's not okay when it's just an regular civilian person's murdered and it's not solved. But now here you have this highly, decorated police officer that was murdered in front of his home in broad daylight, and it's not solved. How does this happen?
Right.
And that's, why we're, seeking justice, because it's been too long.
That's one of the things that's been kind of frustrating as I've been getting to learn more of the details of this case is, at least from what's being reported in some of the reports at the time, there's a lot of pretty strong circumstantial evidence pointing towards one particular suspect, but very strong. Like, remembering someone's license plate and that vehicle being in a part of town where it normally shouldn't be. The type of explosive being identified and that employee having access, well, at least his department having access to that type of explosive, and some of that goes missing from the department. Like there's a lot of connecting pieces there. Obviously, it looks like there's a very strong piece, and that's the physical direct connection that seems to be missing a little bit. I thought, because one of the articles mentioned they did find some of the explosive in that vehicle as well. I think in the carpet or something in the front of that vehicle. But obviously, that wouldn't be the same as like a fingerprint or something. It's not a one-to-one match. I mean, it's like, yes, it's the same type of explosive that's in that vehicle, but they can't say that that's exactly the same batch that was used in the actual explosive device. There's also something else I just wanted to touch on here. I feel like there is maybe a little bit of a silent hero in this. How did your mom pull through this, keep the family together, keep herself together, and be able to raise wonderful children? How did she do that?
Who knows? I wouldn't be able to do it. She's awesome. And I know my sister has said it before and she's gone into it in length, but, she certainly had her depressed times.
Yeah.
And we were, supported by a lot of people in that beginning time. They supported my mom. They supported us. They helped us with school. They helped us teach us how to drive. They would hang out with my mom and just sit with her. But I think then just something must have clicked in her one day and she just was like, well, I got to keep going. I mean, that's what I assume kind of went on in her mind. And, listen, I got 3 kids I got to raise and they're still in school, 9th grade, 7th grade, 5th grade, things have to keep on keeping on. And I guess I wouldn't have been able to do it. I mean, I would like to think I would be able to, but
I
don't know. She's definitely the rock.
I mean, she's told me that she had, she didn't tell me then, but later in life, becoming a mother myself and being like, oh my God, how did you, I always knew then that it was what she was doing was hard, but just then even becoming an adult myself and having children of my own, being like, wow, how did you do that? And, then her telling me, she did have some very dark moments of, wanting to give up. And, thank God she had support from, friends and family and things like that, like Jen said. I think some of her feelings were normal, obviously, due to circumstances, but I don't know. I mean, I remember crying with her. She always kind of allowed, if I had to just cry for no reason, which was a lot as a kid and going into my teenage years. I mean, I spent a lot of times just laying in her bed, crying to her, just literally crying and asking her the same questions over and over again, like why, but what about this? And her trying her best to just be honest and tell the truth. And meanwhile, there she is, she's struggling with the same thing. And she's trying to, not only did she lose her husband in a horrific way, but she's hurting from the hurt of her children. And I feel so bad that she had to experience that. But like Jen said, she just had to keep on keeping on. And she, in the beginning, we knew like she was like not eating. And I mean, she lost a tremendous amount of weight, like unhealthy, unhealthy. I get sad if I even see a picture from that time period because she was like sickly, but then I think as time went on, like Jen said, she tried to keep things normal for us too. And it's okay to be sad, but it's okay to be happy at times if something happy happens, which I think, I'm sorry if I'm rambling now, but like she, I know she tells me a story of, I guess it was one time I think she was afraid to go outside, whatever was, going on with her. She felt safe in the house and whatever. So she, we were outside, I think, playing basketball or something. We had a basketball net a basketball hoop in our driveway. And, which was very exciting when my dad put in, we were like, oh, this is so cool. We made the driveway bigger. He cemented it into the driveway. Like that was the coolest thing.
Yeah.
So she was sitting on the stoop, she said, watching us play basketball. Like we were all out there. And she said that she, I guess, was smiling because like we were having fun. So it made her, I guess, feel a little happiness. But I think a police officer or somebody came by to like check on us because they did from time to time check on us for a long time. I don't remember who exactly it was, but she said she got so scared because she was like, oh my God, like I'm not supposed to be smiling and we're not supposed to have fun. And, she was so conflicted with her own feelings that like, she was smiling, sitting on the stoop and she was like, I gotta run inside. Like she was just afraid, like, okay, this is way too past, way out of my comfort zone. I'm going back in, like, right. Which is crazy to think about, but like, her mom, this is what she was dealing with at the time, like crazy stuff,
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, we have a really great family and my mom comes from a great family. She has 3 awesome brothers, my uncles. And at the time, her parents, my grandparents, and even on my dad's side, they're really great also. But my mom's side of the family is local to us. So they really took good care of her, and a lot of certain members in the police department that were close to my dad took care of her. So people were looking out for us for a while, which I think helped my mom also.
Yeah.
And then, like my sister said, I guess she realized at some point it's okay to smile sometimes. And here we are smiling sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Were you guys afraid at all of further attacks when you were younger? Were you afraid someone would come back for you guys?
I don't think initially when it first happened and we didn't have as much information as far as like suspects and things like that.
Yeah. It
was very scary. And what do you mean? What's going on? And this is, a drug dealer. And, we were, hiding out at my uncle's house and staying there. And, that was very scary and confusing and chaos. But then as time went on and we, learned a little bit more information, it not that it wasn't scary, but we knew that it wasn't most likely not that we were going to be, put in a situation where, okay, now someone's going to blow up my mom's car or something like that, because we kind of learned that it was very specific, he was targeted specifically. Yeah. So it kind of took away the fear in that aspect, but
I mean, in the beginning for me, I had sheer terror. I was petrified. This was the craziest thing ever. And even just to have to go to the wake service, I remember I didn't want to go in the car that someone was driving because I was afraid it was going to happen to that car. And I remember they had to like start it for me first. start it first. I'm afraid to go in it. It was a little more scary than I'm describing it. But for me, I was petrified in that moment.
Yeah.
And then, like my sister said, as we learned more information, we realized our dad was the target. The explosion itself was relatively contained in the land of explosions. The whole car wasn't like on fire and this whole giant thing and the houses caught fire. It was just very like aimed and on purpose. But I have to say though, I admit 31 years later, when I get in my car on February 15th, I do stop for a second. Sorry.
Oh, it's totally understandable. It's totally understandable, especially because whoever did it's still out there. Whoever did it's still walking around. That's one of the things that's kind of tough about it too. No, please don't be. Very soon in the media coverage, we start hearing about Robert Horan and this other aspect about his wife being involved with your father. I think in some way it's terrible to have that news and have that information come out in such a public way. As a matter of fact, we were speaking a little bit before recording and I was talking about like some of this media really sucks. Like they're covering your father's funeral, talking about this massive event and tribute to a hero. And by the way, we think this was a revenge killing because he was sleeping with this other guy's wife. It's such a mixed thing, but in some way it sounds like for your comfort, as soon as the investigation started pointing in that direction, maybe that was helpful to you guys because you felt like, oh, this isn't some criminal underworld that's going to come back and, try to wipe out the whole family or something like that. This is a very specific instance that seems to be tied to this specific situation.
Yes, in a way you do get that feeling kind of goes away to, it's not directed at you specifically, but then this other like wave of feelings come over because then you feel so betrayed because I don't know if betrayed is the right word, but feeling like, what do you mean? This is a possibility. This person is another police officer, and aren't police officers supposed to be like helping people and not killing them? And yeah, feeling definitely some kind of, I guess, some sense of betrayal.
Yeah, I would agree with betrayal. I mean, I don't know if comfort is the right word when we were getting more information, because in like the same 48 hours, we learned that our dad died. He was murdered by a car bomb and he was having an affair. We didn't know about that. And oh, by the way, it's a police officer, like my sister mentioned. And oh, by the way, you know him. So,
right.
Very mixed emotions. Very mixed emotions.
Yeah. And I imagine it's not much easier at this point, 31 years later.
No, it gets even more frustrating because that person has created so much pain and hurt. But now it's frustrating because why did we have to miss out on all those things all these years? And that person gets to enjoy their time with their kids, their grandkids, life itself, have a pension that you just get to live a great life off of. Right. So it's extremely frustrating. It's unfair. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah. So has it been a struggle to try to keep the general public focused on who your father was as a person versus the kind of media slant of, boiling it down to, oh, it's a love triangle. This is a revenge situation. How's that been for you guys?
I kind of feel like maybe that's how things were left off in the past, maybe because before social media and all that, you know, he was just like, I think Jen had mentioned, like this guy that had an affair and then got murdered by a, you know, by a car bomb, and that's it.
Right.
So now that we have this opportunity to have our own voice, I mean, especially at the time in 1990 when this happened, we were just kids. It's not like, oh, I'm going to start contacting the media. I'm just trying to figure out how to get by every day as a kid and survive after my dad was killed. But yeah, this last year was the 30-year mark, and it was just like, you know, I just spend some time online and stuff and see things like this. And I was like, you know, well, you know, this would be good for us to, you know, keep his memory alive, but also try and seek justice for him by getting the right information out there. People kind of, I mean, didn't even know it wasn't even solved. It was just kind of like, I mean, and people locally that kind of just assumed, oh, well, it must have got solved, you know. We're here to kind of be the voice for him and make sure that it's not forgotten and it's, you know, it's staying active and we're not going away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you've been doing a really good job of that from what I'm seeing over on the Facebook page, asking some pretty direct and tough questions about the investigation, but also sharing some of those special memories and photographs and all that. I think that's really important to help the public that's interested enough to know, because obviously there's people that are going to just know the headline version of the story and they're just not going to dive any deeper, but people that really care can certainly.
I mean, and unfortunately we have to deal with those weirdo people behind the keyboard all the time, you know, on forums and stuff like that, where it's like, well, you sleep with another guy's, you know, wife. That's what you get. Like, really? Right. Is that, you know, but that's just, to me, I've learned that person's just as crazy as a murderer, in my opinion, because if you think it's, you know, we're not
okay for any reason.
Yeah. We're not ever trying to say that having an affair is like the best way to go. And, you know, I'm sure my mom was hurt by that. And for the record, that was something that she was aware of before he was killed. And they were working on their marriage and getting past that. So my mom, she was in the same position and didn't kill anybody.
Right.
And then you have this other side. I'm sure she was angry and I'm sure she was upset at times.
Yeah.
But they made the choice that they're going to work it out, and that's it. I mean, but somebody else took a different route, unfortunately.
Right. Right. So you start the Facebook page, and does that prompt the FBI's involvement? It seems like all of a sudden something lights under this case about a little over a year ago. Is that how it happened?
Exactly. So what happens is 30-year mark is approaching. We create this, you know, Facebook page called Justice for Dennis Wustenhoff. Not even thinking, you know, it's going to get a lot of attention, just kind of, I don't know, to have some sense of control over something, because, you know, all these years have gone by and we don't have a voice. So let's create this page. And, you know, we start getting a lot of like local people and family and friends and supporters, and kind of didn't really expect it to get the attention. And then, you know, all of a sudden, you know, we're meeting with the police department kind of in our normal typical, hey, what's going on? It's 30 years and what's the update? And, you know, here's the same runaround every year. And, you know, it's 30 years. What's the deal? And, you know, this year, that was last February. We got a little bit of a different response, I think. You know, in my opinion, you know, this is where I want to pat ourselves on the back, because I think because we made a little bit of a
we made a stink. We got loud.
We made a little noise, and sometimes people don't like that, but unfortunately that's the way to get some attention. And maybe the right person in charge this time, the police commissioner at the time, stepped up to, okay, let's get we're going to get the FBI involved. So I really do think it is because of us that happened, because now everybody's watching. So it can't be ignored, because it's not just brushed under the rug or put in the back file box collecting dust. I don't know. I'm not saying it was collecting dust or people were maybe, reviewing it. I don't know, but I just know that we made a headache and a lot more accomplishments have been made. And actually, there's now a $60,000 reward, which there hasn't been a reward in years, since like 1990. So,
wow.
And I really do feel that's because of us.
It did collect dust for a little while there.
Yeah.
And, you cause a little ruckus and stuff gets done, and the FBI is currently working on it. We're in touch with the DA's office. They're active on the case. As my sister mentioned, there's now a reward. There was a reward, I think, when my dad was first killed. And then that just sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
So, we think it's important to have a reward, and hopefully that will bring attention to someone who tells us that one little piece that just connects the last dot, so that we can, resolve this and our dad can rest in peace finally.
Well, we also have time has passed, but that means technology has gotten better. I don't know if they're going through the old evidence, trying different testing methods on that might provide that physical link that we're looking for, that firms up all the circumstantial evidence that we've been talking about on today's episode. But it's good to know that those options are now in play after all this time. I
think the whole idea is they are just starting from square one and not leaving any stone unturned, and they're checking and rechecking and doing everything possible. That's kind of the best we could say, because it is an open investigation.
Yeah.
So it's, and it's fresh eyes, and now it's the FBI also. So,
right.
Like you said, new technologies, new advancements. So if I was the person that killed my dad, which, it's horrible, but I would start to get a little worried that, my freedom is soon ending.
I can tell you, I speak to many families that pray to be in the situation that your guy's in. When the FBI is taking the file, it's being reprocessed from the start. There's a lot of things that can happen very rapidly. So yeah, I think you're making a really good point.
Yeah. And, when they first got involved, like you mentioned, it was about a year ago, which also was, when the pandemic started.
Right.
So initially the start was a little slower than I think they had hoped for, but it's going along now. So we're very hopeful. Very hopeful.
Things are really opening up this past month. That's for sure.
Right.
And I saw a couple of special things I just wanted to touch on along the way. So there's a memorial police car in your father's honor. How did that happen?
Well, to be honest, in Suffolk County, all of the line of duty officers do have a police car, in memoriam, and it has their name on it.
Oh, wow.
So our dad, was murdered in the line of duty as he was getting into his police vehicle.
Yeah.
So he does, in fact, have a marked car in memory to him. It's actually a car number 221 in the 2nd precinct here. And back in his early days, I believe it was his first car was 221.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's pretty special. So, but yeah, we love that.
And then earlier this year, there was a billboard literally driving around for 2 weeks with case information and an offer of the reward. How did that happen?
I think that was, again, creating some noise and getting some of the other departments involved as far as, well, CrimeStoppers came forward and they, wanted to offer a reward. And then we had the PBA, the SOA, and the SDA. They wanted to contribute to the reward. And then they also wanted the PBA, those three departments, they wanted to, they kind of came up with this idea for this billboard campaign. Let's just get this out there, because social media is great, but, there's a lot of people who are not on social media. Let's kind of get this out in front of people. And when you see it like that, it's this huge truck driving around with this picture on it.
Yeah.
And then actually, as things were going on, the CrimeStoppers increased their reward as we're literally like about to launch this truck. And then there were private donors involved who, wanted to donate to the reward. So, so it was just, this truck that people would spot and send pictures and, get that out there.
Pretty amazing that you've got this community and support that's just rallying around you guys as you're pressing forward with all this. I'm just really moved by it. I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful that there's people out there willing to help like that.
Yeah, we are too. And we feel it, we, people like you, people like Mike King, our friends, our family, everybody that's on that Facebook page, we literally read every comment that every person writes. We respond to some,
like complete strangers who could feel that, like, that same kind of feeling of the support,
Yeah, it definitely lifts us up and motivates us to just keep going. I mean, as if we're not motivated enough, but it's certainly, we feel it for sure.
Well, you guys can be part of Team Dennis too. We have a link in the description box below. Please click that, join that Facebook group, and help these ladies follow their path to justice. Kevin, your brother.
Yes.
Honoring your father's legacy as well. Became an officer himself. Newsday had a quote from him that I just wanted to share with everyone. When I learned to drive, when I went to the prom, when I got married, when I had children, when I graduated from the academy, that's when it has become toughest, he said. That's when I think about him. That's when I want him here. I suppose that sentiment echoes with you guys, though, about those important memories that you have in life and just thinking, wow, what would Dad say if he was here to see this? What would he say if he was here to be a part of his grandchildren being born?
Yeah, I mean, all of those things he missed out on and we missed out on.
Yeah.
I mean, just going back for a second, what we spoke about earlier, him being in Vietnam, now that we're adults, we can't even carry on a conversation with him, asking him, hey, what was it like? Like, right. We have no idea. So we missed out on that. My daughter never met him. She has, seen many photos and she has ideas and she knows we're always fighting for justice for him. But, he's just like this thing, this person she imagines, weddings, obviously, like I said, our children, college graduations, certain jobs, my brother graduating the police academy is certainly something my dad, I'm sure, was looking down on from above, but, would have been really nice if he could have been there in person.
Well, and all those memories that you've shared with us about the childhood memories that you have with your father, and just thinking, what type of grandfather would he have been? I'm sure grandkids would have been braiding his hair and doing his makeup.
Exactly. I mean, it's like the big things are important, but those like little things are really important. Like, like the gardening and like, or fixing something and like, how would I do this? Like, how would he do it? Like, what would he say? I mean, many times I'm out in the yard and I'm, gardening or raking the dirt or whatever it is I'm doing. You're kind of wondering, would he like this? Would he like how I made the plants? I know that sounds funny, but I think like I said, he took pride in that. And would he be like, wow, what a great job? Like, I have no idea, and
Yeah,
it's just sad those little things he doesn't get to be a part of.
definitely. Anything you want to say before we wrap up here?
Just that we hope everyone joins the Justice for Dennis Wustenhoff Facebook page. Right now we're at about 6,900 supporters. And I know my sister says all the time, let's get to 10,000. Let's get to 10,000. So hopefully
It's going to happen.
People will come join us and follow along on our journey. And also, there's the reward that we keep talking about. If anyone is able to commit towards that reward, we would be forever grateful. And, at 60,000, it's a great amount, but if we can get that up to 100,000 or more, we just think then that will draw the attention we need. So that person, steps forward with that piece of information. And, that would be great. And we're so thankful for everyone and for the opportunity to be here. And at the end of the day, we just want our dad's case to be solved. It's too long. It's too long.
Yeah.
I kind of just want to say, and I think I, said this a couple other times, I don't want to be repetitive, but I want to leave everybody off with that there's still a murderer out there among us. Somebody horrifically murdered a police officer in front of his home. Luckily, his family was not home at the time, but this person could be walking right by you in the supermarket. This person can be at your kid's sports game watching their grandkid or whatnot. But there's somebody out there that's capable of killing somebody by a car bomb, and they are not held accountable for that, and they need to be. And that's the most important thing here, is that we need to get justice for our dad.
Well, I think you guys are on the path. Thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for holding firm, taking it one step at a time, rallying a great community around you. I know you're going to get a bunch of new supporters from being here with us today. Please be sure to keep us informed, keep us updated. If there's anything we can do to help you along the way, you know how to get a hold of me. Please just ask. We'll do anything we can to help you in this effort. And we truly hope that someday we can have you back on here. I do another show called Case Cracked, where we talk about how cases get solved. I want you guys to show up on that episode to tell me how this case gets solved someday. So
that would be great. We would love for that.
Look forward to that.
We would absolutely love that.
Yeah. Thank you both.
And thank you, John, so much for having us. Again, we appreciate you so much.
You got it. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to spend time with you guys like this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, just a very big thank you to Melissa and Jen for sharing all of that with us today. Also, huge thank you to Mike King from Profiling Evil for joining us. And I got to tell you, I didn't realize we were going to have that special moment of Mike being touched by talking about the Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. They are doing a fundraiser right now called United by Light 2021. They're looking to raise $100,000. They're about halfway there at this point. People that make a donation are able to leave a message in tribute to the person that they're making the donation for, or even just in general, if you would like. I have made a donation to them specifically to support the search for justice for Dennis Wustenhoff. In honor of the service Dennis Wustenhoff provided to his community and the search for justice that his family continues to this day, 3 decades after his end of watch. Please consider supporting their efforts by visiting, and then I have the Facebook link down below. I hope you guys will hit the description box down below, find that same Facebook link, and come to this page, follow, help support. Let's keep the momentum going. Let's keep this page growing. Let's see if this family can find some answers to the many questions that they're left with, that they've been sitting with for 31 years at this point. I also want to thank you Lorden Arts supporters out there. We've got some new patrons to thank. Thank you, Susan Dickman, and thank you, Brittany Yard, for joining on Patreon. On top of that, a big thank you to Sharon Ayers, Mallory Bacon, and Casey Monks for increasing your pledges. If If you'd like to support the channel, please visit lordandarts.com, where you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or just buy us a coffee. Together, we're doing amazing things like the donation we did in today's episode, and I really appreciate your support. Also, raising awareness, giving these families a platform to share what they are going through, their search for justice. I can't do this without you guys. Thank you so, so much. Take care, everyone. Have a safe and happy weekend. We'll see you again on Monday with a brand new episode of Case Cracked right here on the Lord and Arts channel.